Today we'll take a look at how to work with materials and 3D models in the Titan game engine. First of all, we'd like to create a folder for our resources. We can create it either inside our application that we created in the last tutorial or outside. The difference being, if we create this folder inside the application, then all these resources would be embedded into an executable when we publish our game. And sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't. In our case, I think we don't want to embed all the images, materials, and so on into the executable, since it'll become too large. And we'd like to just keep it outside in a separate file. So we'll make a separate folder, call it resources, and then we'd like to create a material. Let's make a new folder inside this folder, call it materials, and inside new material. Let's start with grass, for example. When we open the material, we'll see a pretty typical PBR workflow: color map, alpha map, bump, normal, smooth, and so on. Let's start with importing a texture, and then we'll see what each of these options does. I have some textures here. Let's get our grass, and we'll drag it onto our material. Not to apply it yet, but just to have it inside the material for better organization. Like we saw in the previous tutorial, we can rearrange most of the elements in any way we want, and this will just show us that this grass texture belongs to this material. Now that this grass texture is important, we can open it in a separate editor if we'd like. It is an image editor, and here we can choose some parameters. First of all, we can choose its type, which can be a compressed texture, a full texture, and alpha texture. For now, we'll leave it as it is. We can also configure MIP maps, size, alpha frame luminance, and mode. The mode determines the way in which the engine interprets this image. It can be a 2D texture, what we need right now, since we'll just use it as a color texture for our material. It can also be a cube texture. A cube texture is used as a skybox. As you see, if we look in this preview, this grass texture now became a skybox, an environment map, or a software texture. They all have their uses, but for now we'll just keep it as a 2D texture. We can also change its width and height. We have some information about it and some parameters about how it is displayed. For now we won't change anything here and leave it as it is. Getting back to our material, let's drag this into a color slot. And we now see that we get a color texture on our sphere here. To better see the material, we can double click on this preview, and this will open it in a larger window, so we can see it better. We can also preview it on different shapes. For example, here we have a sphere. We can change it to a cube, a cylinder, or a plane. But we'll leave it as a sphere for now. We can see that I don't have any grass normal maps or bump maps, but we'll probably need them since we like our grass to look a bit less flat. You can see that I am dragging a light source here. You can do it with a right click and drag, use them with the wheel, and rotate the sphere with the left click and drag. Currently our sphere looks quite flat and we don't have any normal maps, and what the engine allows us to do is to just generate these bump and normal maps from our color map. To do this, just drag the same texture into the bump slot, and now it has generated our bump map and normal map. And as we can see that it already looks a bit better here, but we can adjust it in the bump and normal parameters. For example, a bit more bump and maybe like this. It doesn't really matter right now, it's just to show that it works. Here we can also adjust its technique, which means what kind of material this is. We can render it as an opaque material, which we will use for our grass. We can render it with alpha test, fur, for example, fur looks like this, and many others. You can just hover over these options and get the descriptions of what each of them does. We'll leave it as opaque for now. Here you can also adjust channels of the texture, or this one button defaults them back to 1, and I'll leave it as it is. We can have our settings for an alpha. We can flip normal, use roughness in case we have a smoothness map. We can use a roughness map instead. We have neither, and options for smoothness, reflectivity, and glow. We can make a material glow if we want. We can make it emit some colors, and UV scale and detail power are best shown with the fur material. Example, detail UV scale changes the size of each fur part, and detail power changes how long the fur is. Detail all LODs will mean that we'll keep the detail of this material on all LODs. So even at large distances, our materials will be detailed. How we'll see this option used when we get to grass. And UV scale is best seen on a plane. So here we have our plane. And if I change UV scale, it will scale this texture, making it larger or smaller. I'll leave it as 1 for now, maybe we'll change it later. And here we have settings for texture quality. We can leave it at full or maybe compress somehow, and texture size for mobile and switch publishing. Now that we have our grass material, we can add our other materials. I have here dirt and stone, so let's add them the same way. Now that we have these materials, we can delete these textures since they are already embedded into the materials and we don't need them, and it will decrease the size of our project. Now that we have our terrain materials, we might want to add some water to our map. So let's add water material, call it water, and it has a similar preview but with different settings. I have a folder here with the 3 water maps, and I'll just drag the whole folder here and it will import all of it. So let's add color, add normal, and add a bump map. And here we see our water. We can change the base color, make it darker, or maybe add some tint to it. We can change smoothness of the water, its reflectivity. All of these will be better seen when we add this water to our map, so I won't explain along these settings. We'll just look at them again when we get to creating our map, which will be probably in the next video. Now that we have our water, we can once again delete these images and our water stays the same. Right, so we have our materials. Let's get to models. I have several models here, our castle, mage, which will be our main character, and a skeleton, which will be an enemy. So let's start with our mage. We'll import it by just dragging. It has a lot of stuff inside, so it'll take some time to process. We can see that it is now imported, and it also have a ton of animations inside. We'll look at them later. Now let's click on our mage and see what model editor options we have. Here is our model editor. You can rotate the camera with the middle click and drag, and while holding space, you can, without clicking anything else, just pan the camera around, and you can zoom with the mouse wheel. In the top left here, we can see some more settings for our camera. For example, we have this cube with which you can rotate either freely or by pressing on its side and rotating in set angles. Also, this square allows us to set some preset camera angles. This R button resets the camera position, and this center camera on object centers the camera on object. We can also add some controls here. For example, let's add an analog pad, and it adds another control here which allows us to do the same operations we did with our keyboard and mouse, but to do it only with the mouse, if you'd like to do this. There is several options, you can try all of them. I'll just leave them out for now. Here we can see some options for rendering. For example, we can render vertices, render wireframe, or bounding box. We don't need anything like this for now, but these options are present. And now we see a lot of tabs here which allow us to modify our model in various ways. The first one is transform. It has familiar scale, moving the model, rotating the model. We can also reset all of these, and there are also some useful buttons like move Z to 0, Y to 0, center to 0, 0, 0, and so on. After changing any of these, you need to press OK to actually apply the changes. The params section is something we'll look at later. The LOD section allows us to create levels of details for model. We can either create them automatically, generate them. As you can see, there are some settings, and right now it generated a simpler model from our original. We can set distance at which it will be set, and during our game it will be set automatically, or we can set it manually through code. We can press OK and it is added, and we can also load one from file if we like, but for now I don't need any of these, and I can just delete it with this cross button. The mesh section allows us to edit the mesh. We can see different parts of it as how they are highlighted, and we can either add the existing ones by using any of these operations or create new ones. You can see we can spawn some boxes, balls, for example. We can spawn a box and then edit it somehow, but we don't need that for now. The variations sections allows us to create material variations. For example, have several tints of clothing and then set them through code. We don't have any of these for now, so we won't add them. Slots are places on our model that we can attach other models to. For example, if we have a shooter, we can have a slot hand, and we slot a model gun into this slot hand. These slots are created on bones, which is why it shows all the bones here. If you'd like to add, you can have +1 is to create a new slot, -1 is to delete a slot, and you can move them, rotate, and so on. Also several operations for them if you'd like to use this feature. Then we have bones, which once again shows us the skeleton. You can see in the left as I have the names of the bones and their parents. You can have various operations with the bones. You can change the shape if you'd like this display better. And once again, you have many operations with them if you'd like to change anything. And then we have our skinning menu, which allows us to apply some skin changes to different parts of our mesh. The physics menu allows us to create physics body for our model. There are several types of physics bodies which work differently with different types of physics actors in the engine. There can be 3 types of actors: static, dynamic, and kinematic. Static actors are something like buildings. They generally don't move. We can move them manually, but these operations take a lot of processing power and it is not recommended to call them frequently. For static objects, we can use either static meshes, which creates a physics body that repeats the whole mesh. We can also use convex shapes, which create a more general body around the model, or we can use a body from some basic shapes, like for example a cylinder. Kinematic actors are actors that don't move by themselves, but can be moved manually. An example of such actor is a moving platform, which doesn't really change its movement based on interactions with other actors, but is still moving. And for kinematic actors, we can use either convex or basic shape physics body, and we cannot use static meshes. Dynamic objects are the ones that move based on interactions with other physics objects, and for them, once again, we can use either convex shapes or basic shapes. We can also toggle which parts of the mesh are included into the physics body. For example, I previously created this cube, but I don't want it to be in our physics body. So I select it, and now if I create, for example, static mesh, you can see it does not include this box. And we can do this with any part of the mesh. For example, let's remove this head, and now this head has no physics. And to bring these parts back, we just click on them again, and they are back. We can also change the density parameter here, and we can set a physics material. We won't set it for now, but I'll show it how it's done. Here we can create a new physics material, open it, and we see our editor, which has some settings like friction, bounciness, damping, and it shows animations which allow us to preview how this particular material will react with the environment. And then when we create our material, we just drag it here, and it gets applied. If we like, we can also create several physical body parts, but we won't create any for now for this particular character, and you'll see why when we get to game objects, which will be in a later video. Now we can go to draw groups. This allows us to change what groups are rendered during our game. For example, if we have a first-person game, we generally don't want to render the head of the model, since it will interfere with our camera. And so for this, we can create an enum. We can see here draw group enums. Let's create a new enumeration, call it draw parts, create body and head. This enumeration works like a general C or C++ enumeration, but has its own project element which can be used outside the code. For example, here we just drag it into draw groups enum, and we can see it here. By default, it assigned all the parts of the mesh to the body, to the first member of this enum. But let's drag our head onto mage head and mage head. Now we'll see that our body has all the body of the mage, and head group has all the head parts of the mage. And if we like, we can then from code change what group is being rendered and adjust it to our needs. For now we won't do any of this, so I'll just clear this enum. The remove section allows us to remove certain parts from the mesh we don't want. For example, here I created this cube, but I don't want it to be in our model, so I click on it. And also we can see here that there are two books in this mage's hand, probably to accommodate for certain animations, but I'd like to have only one. Let's say I'd like to have only the closed book. I also click on the book, and you can see it is blinking red. You can't really see this on the cube since it's white, but on the book you can see it well. And I don't think we need to remove anything else here. So we just unpress the remove, and at least the book disappeared. Let's remove the cube as well, and it is removed. The ragdoll allows us to edit ragdoll. We can toggle bones, which will work with ragdoll in the character. The body parameter allows us to set the body for this object, and if we set some object as a body to this current object will use the same skeleton as the body object. This can be useful in several situations. For example, we have a separate model for a character and a separate model for an armor set. And we'd like this armor set be on top of the character and move together with the character. So we obviously wanted to use the same skeleton. In this case, we open the armor model, then we drag our character model onto this body object part, and now our armor set will use the same skeleton as the character and will look nice, like it is sitting on the character as intended. Here we have everything in our one model, so we won't use this, but this can be useful if you have separate, for example, clothing and characters. And to see what is background, we'll need to add another model. Let's add our castle. Here's the castle we have. And so what is background? For example, I'd like to adjust the scale of this mage. I don't know how large this model is compared to the castle, and I'd like to see it. So I open the background, and I just drag the castle here. And now we can see that we can change the opacity of this castle. We can see that the mage is almost as large as this castle. So we probably want to go to transform and scale it down quite a bit, maybe like this. So this background feature is really useful when we want to compare some models, like in this case. And to remove this castle, we just press clear, and going to transform, we need to press OK so that the changes are actually applied. Now let's add our final model, the skeleton. And now we can once again adjust its scale. For example, comparing to the mage this time, we can make it a lot smaller. Let's make it like this maybe. Alright. And we clear the background. This will be our enemy model. And it once again includes a ton of animations, and now let's look at the animations themselves. Let's open, for example, the walk animation. It once again opens in its own editor, and you can see the preview that is playing the animation. We have its length here. We can make it loop. I know the animation is already looped here, but this is just a preview. If this box is unticked, then in our game this walking animation won't be looped. So we want to check this box here. Linear controls how the keyframe interpolation works. It can be either linear or cubic. Here you can see the explanation what to use where, but I'll leave it like this for now. Target object is the object to which this animation applies, in our case it's correctly set to this skeleton. But if it is not set, you can just drag an object here and it will be set. We can stop it from playing in the preview with this play checkbox, or we can apply certain speed to it to preview it at different speeds. We can also move it manually with this timeline here. We can also display its bones, its slots. We currently don't have any, so there is nothing here. The axis and the plane. We'll look at edit in a minute. Down here we have events. Events are certain steps in the animation which we can label and then refer to them in the code. For example, this is a walking animation, and maybe I'd like to play a certain sound each time a step occurs. So I can go to the part with the step right around here, and I insert an event here and call it step 1. And we'll find another step which is right in the beginning. and insert another event here, which will be step 2. Now, in our code, when we work with animation, we can refer to these steps, to these events, and, for example, play a sound when they occur. We can also rename them, I'll delete them for now, and maybe we'll add them back later. Now, this edit button allows us to edit animation keyframes, which will take us to a different editor. Here we have a timeline, and here we can manually move certain bones around. For example, let's select the set position offset and move helmet here, and then in this keyframe, move helmet here. Now we can see that helmet moves between these two frames. Here you can manually adjust the animation if you'd like. I'll leave it as it is, since the animation seems fine, but you have this option. And to exit this, we once again press Edit, and it takes us back to this simple editor. Now that we have all the models and materials, we are ready to start building our map, which we'll do in the next video.